So this is what a grand piano looks like, but of course much, much smaller. And what happens is the whole side lifts up, and then a stick keeps the whole thing from falling down. And then in the front are the keys that you play, and each one of those keys pushes a string that's inside. Oh, here's my stick. This one's a music box, so this one isn't an actual piano. So I don't have any strings in here. But that's what it looks like when it's open. And inside here are all different lengths of strings that fit inside. The lower the lower the note, the longer the string. The higher the note, the shorter the string. So on this end are all the short notes, that smaller end. And on this note, the long end, that's all the longer notes, the deeper notes. So that's what a grand piano looks like. Now, what they'll do sometimes is that they'll take a piano and they'll stack it up and make an upright piano. And the upright piano puts the strings lengthwise. It still has a box you can open on the back to make the sound a little brighter, or you can play it with the top closed as well. The top doesn't make a difference as far as actually playing it. Just sounds a lot better if you open it. So if you're practicing and you don't want to be as loud, you keep the top down. When you're doing a big performance for a lot of people, you want to open it up. Okay? So the next thing, that's strings, all right? So in that group, I have a couple of specifics I'd like to talk to you about. For a cello, there's lots of old classical performers there are recordings of that you can listen to of classical. That means really old music, great music, but written over 100 years ago. But what I want to talk to you about a little more to make it make more sense to you is musicians that are still alive today, or that their music is still so popular that even if they have passed on, their music is still important to people who are alive today. So I'm going to tell you about Yo-Yo Ma. Yo-Yo, I know, what a name, right? It's a cool name. Yo-Yo Ma is a famous cello player. My husband also plays cello. There's a lot of people that play cello. It's very, very popular and very fun to play. Yo-Yo Ma does some cool stuff with his cello playing. There's a really wonderful song that he did with another couple of musicians and a vocalist named Bobby Darin. Now, Bobby Darin is really well known for not just singing regular songs, but using his mouth and the rest of his body to create percussive sounds. So he and Yo-Yo Ma got together and they did a version of Hush Little Baby, and it's a delight to watch. And what I'd like you to do is when you watch these videos, if they're soloists, I want you to really pay attention to the sound that one instrument makes. But in this one, there's 4 people. There's the singer and 3 musicians. So I want you to listen to each one of those instruments that they're playing and see if you can hear the difference between all of them. And you get to watch them play as well. B.B. King was a really famous guitar player, a jazz guitar player. He's still around, which is phenomenal. And he is just amazing live, a live show. And he did a really great version of Stand By Me, which is a famous song from the 1950s. I'd love for you to listen to that one. He also has online something that's titled His Favorite Performance Live, and that's worth watching as well. There's a very famous violinist named Itzhak Perlman. He plays a lot of classical music, but he also played a soundtrack for a movie that won an Oscar. It means it was the very best soundtrack for a movie that year, and it was for Schindler's List. Schindler's List was the name of the movie, and his name is tricky. Itzhak Perlman. It's just spelled how it sounds. I-T-Z-H-A-K. Itzhak. Itzhak Perlman. P-E-R-L-M-A-N. And you could look up tons of stuff by him. He's an amazing, probably the most famous violin player that we have. My favorite violin player, well, actually, he is my favorite violin player, so there you go. Bass players now. Another bass player, and B.B. King played the electric bass, but one of my favorite musicians that I've gotten to meet once is named Sting. and he plays both the electric bass and the upright bass. He's written a lot of music for movies as well, and there's one song that he wrote for a movie called Moonlight, and he plays the upright bass in that, and it's just beautiful. So that's the one I would like you to hear on that. It also has a lovely vocal. That has a full orchestra, so you'll want to hear all of the different sounds that are being played during that, but the solo part is him playing the upright bass. Banjo, we talked about banjo for a second. Steve Martin, who's a famous comedian, is actually a world well-known banjo player. And when he plays the banjo, it's electric. It's just amazing. And he has a fabulous one that he does called Foggy Mountain Breakdown. Foggy Mountain Breakdown. And I'd like you to listen to that one of his. Now moving on to the percussion section. Now this is the one that a lot of people really like. They really want to be percussive players. They want to be drummers. They want to play the cymbals. They want to play the xylophone. They want to play the chimes and the bells. Well, there's a lot of things in the percussion section. The number one thing is the drums. And in an orchestra, the number one drums are the snare and the timpani and the bass drum. But there's also a lot of other drums. There's Congo drums, and there's just a ton of, it goes on and on, the number of drums you can play. And also the percussion. The percussion section in any orchestra is the most, there's the most number of different instruments in a percussion group. I went and saw a pop singer, Elton John, live, and he had 3 different giant stages full of different percussion sections and 3 guys playing all the different sections. It was amazing. Considering that he was the only piano player and all that percussion just went with him, which is just great. Another thing that they have are things that you might think of. Xylophone, I mentioned. Cowbells, those are percussion. Sticks, playing sticks. Triangle is also percussion. And a tambourine is also percussion. That's one that a lot of us love to play. It can be a complete, don't know anything about music, but I could take that tambourine and bang out with any song that I hear. There's no way to do tambourine wrong. It's phenomenal. So for in this section, there's a couple different people I'd like you to watch. One is Buddy Rich. He was considered to be one of the best drum players who ever lived, and he plays with a snare set. That's a lot of different size snare drums. Snare drums are the small round drums that you hit with a stick. And then he has a ton of different cymbals, which are the pieces of metal. Some of them are by themselves. Some of them slap like this, two big pieces of brass metal. And then there's the bass drum. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there's a bunch. They're played with your feet while you're doing the stuff with your hands. So Buddy Rich was a player during the big band era of American music. That was during the 1940s and 50s. And he had his own big band, and he was the leader, even though he was the drummer. And a lot of times you don't think of the guy playing the drums as being the leader of anything. But not only was he the leader of a band, so was a current contemporary pop artist named Phil Collins. He's also a drummer, but he is the lead singer of a rock band. And then there's another guy that I just love, and he was the lead drummer of a rock band called Def Leppard. And he was a wonderful drummer. And then he got in a really bad accident, and he lost the use of one of his arms. Oh my goodness, that should just end your career, right? I mean, who could play drums with one arm? But he completely redesigned his entire drum set so that he could play everything he used to play with the arm that didn't work as well anymore. He went ahead and used his foot, set up a whole foot drum set for both of his feet to play, and he used his other arm like crazy. And there are some amazing drum solos by him online, and they're actually called Incredible Drum Solo. And his name is, I always get this wrong, his name is Rick Allen. Simple enough name. Rick Allen. So look up Rick Allen, Incredible Drum Solo. And for Buddy Rich, the one I'd like you to look up is, Buddy Rich is the Insane Drum Solo. But Rick Allen also has amazing drum solos online as well. Phil Collins, the song I'd like you to hear is In the Air Tonight. So those are our drummers, percussion players. So now we're going to move on to brass. Now our brass section, there's quite a number of instruments in that family as well. The smallest of that is the cornet, which is a small friend to the trumpet, which is probably one of the most well known. So the cornet plays the highest notes. The trumpet plays also very high notes. The next one up is a trombone that plays deeper notes. Then you have tubas that are about this big and they play deep notes. And you have sousaphones, which are gigantic, and they play the deepest notes of all. And in the middle there you have baritones and French horns and other different kinds of brass instruments. They're made out of brass, that's why they're called brass instruments. And the way they work is kind of like an old-fashioned kazoo. If you've ever played with a kazoo, you blow in it and it's like you're humming into it. And that's how they work. It's called aperture with the lips, and they blow sound into like a round piece like this. And the shape of the instrument and the different ways they close off the middle of it with buttons or with a slider affects the different pitch that gets played, along with you and the way that you hum into the instrument. The next one here, the ones here that I'd like you to listen to, actually I have a very favorite trumpet player that I've also gotten to see live. I love him. His name is Chris Botti, B-O-T-T-I, Chris Botti. And you can listen to any of his music and it's just amazing. But one of my favorites, makes me cry every time, is My Funny Valentine. My Funny Valentine. It's funny, it shouldn't make you cry, right? But it's a love song, and it's, I know boys, I know you're going, rah, but it's a really great song, and it's played by a guy, so you should like it. Then we've got Louis Armstrong, and I know I told you about Louis Armstrong in our last video as a jazz player, and I want to say that both he and Miles Davis, turns out, trumpet player, both of them are people I want you to look at again this week in terms of really listening to the instrument they're playing and how it sounds. So for Louis Armstrong, I'd like you to listen to Basin Street Blues. And for Miles Davis, Summertime. Summertime is written by George Gershwin for a musical called Porgy and Bess. And this is a version without lyrics, and it's just his trumpet is playing the lead line, and he's doing jazz improv on top of that. As far as Chris Botti goes, I said My Funny Valentine is his. So then we're going to move on to the woodwind instruments. For the woodwind instruments, those are not just wood. Wood refers to a little piece of bamboo that is put into a mouthpiece and squeezed into place. And it's called a reed. And that little piece of reed or bamboo shivers when you blow into it. Kind of like if you wanted to do this, if you wanted to try this, if you have grass in your yard, somewhere that you can go to that has a piece of long grass, it has to be kind of long, and you take the grass and you put it between your hands and actually between your thumbs, like this, and you put it in there and you blow, and you let that piece of grass shiver between your hands, you might hear it hum a little bit. So that's something a lot of kids have done since time forever, is play with grass and create their own little woodwind instrument with their hands. So what happens with the woodwinds, some of them are still considered a woodwind instrument because they're wind. It doesn't necessarily have the same kind of a little reed part to it, like a flute or a recorder. Those are simply using the wind from your mouth to make the sound in a different way than a brass instrument does. It's more about that wind than it is about there's a different kind of vibration that happens with the shape of a brass instrument. It has what's called a bell, a big bell that comes out like this, and that really amplifies the sound. And our woodwind instruments, a couple of them have sort of small bells, like a clarinet has a little bit of a bell, and a saxophone has a little bit of a bell. But like a flute doesn't have a reed or a bell. And a recorder doesn't really have much of a bell either. It's kind of straight. So is a piccolo, very straight. An oboe has a weird thing, but it's not the same kind of idea as a brass bell. So the sound is created more by you and your wind than by a hum, okay? Now with those, the most common ones are the flute, which is small. The piccolo is even smaller, so the lighter, brighter sounds are coming from those. Clarinet is somewhere in the middle, it's about this long. The saxophone is longer than that, and it curves, so it has extra. The oboe is really long, and a bassoon is a longer oboe. And the saxophone actually comes itself in several different sizes. So the smaller the saxophone, the higher the sound. The longer the saxophone, the bigger the saxophone, the deeper the sound. I have a few examples that you can listen to for this as well. For mostly for the clarinet, but also one for the saxophone. For the clarinet, I mentioned to you about Buddy Rich and his percussion and how he was in a big band. Well, there were a couple of band leaders that played the clarinet as well, several actually. And a couple of my favorites are Benny Goodman, my absolute favorite big band, and Artie Shaw is another one. My very favorite Benny Goodman song and one of my favorite songs of all time is Sing, Sing, Sing. Fantastic piece of music. And Artie Shaw, as an example of him, is Begin the Beguine, another great piece of music that's been used forever and ever. Begin the Beguine. That's spelled B-E-G-U-I-N-E. Begin the Beguine. See, it's got that, for my older kids, alliteration, B-B-B-B. Now, another instrument called the saxophone is played by a gentleman named Kenny G. And he was really famous like in the 1990s. And he played really mellow jazz. Like a lot of people say that it's the kind of music that you have in an elevator or in a doctor's office. And it's super, super calming. It's great for meditation and yoga and those types of things. But I love choreographing to Kenny G. I love choreographing what's called lyrical dance to his music. Beautiful long lines, very pretty and flowing dance. And my favorite Kenny G song, and pretty much the most famous one that he did, was called Silhouette. So I'd like you to listen to that one. And report back to me and tell me if you found songs that I didn't even mention to you when you were doing your listening. See if you can come up with some and stump me with them. That would be awesome. Thanks.